Okay, let's move on to the next section, which is a lot of fun, and that's effects. You can easily overdo things with effects in Premiere Pro. There's a ton of them. Some are useful, some are crazy, and there's lots of ways to apply them, use them, reuse them, and save them. Let's go have a look. In the effects, not the effects controls will change the effects. Let's go to the effects and go to video effects, and they're also, just like the audio effects, they're divided into categories. Things like the adjust category, where you can change things like levels if you're used to that in Photoshop, blur and sharpen, color correction, distortion. So here's a clip right here. If you have the clip selected and double click, so let's just put turbulent displace on this, and look at that. We've got this kind of warpy kind of look going on. You'll also notice that it doesn't play back perfectly well. It's kind of stuttery, but you still get the effect. Some of these have this little badge, some don't. Turbulent displace is not accelerated. The export's going to look fine. So just playing it back is going to be CPU based instead of GPU. If you don't know what that is, just your export will look fine. It just might not play back smooth, and it might take a little longer to actually render that when you're exporting it. So typically when you add an effect, it has a bunch of settings in here. Turbulent displace has a bunch of turbulence effects, like how is that turbulent? What is the setting here? You can see you've got twists and bulges, and then how much you're doing it. And you can add keyframes. That's what these stopwatches are. So you could add a keyframe for the amount, for the size, and warp the heck out of something very easily. You could also save effects. So selecting the name of the effect, including motion and opacity, you can right-click and save this as a preset. You can copy, you can paste this once you've copied it somewhere else. You can also just select it and delete it or turn it off. So it's very easy to work with the effects. They're all non-destructive, meaning that when you apply them, you haven't changed the video until you export it. That video can have the effect applied or taken off. Let's keep going. That was the distort category. You'll also notice, you can generate gradients, ellipses, flares. I've got lots of tutorials on all of this. Convert something to black and white. There's a whole bunch for VR video here. We're not really going to cover that. There's things like green screen keying. I have a whole tutorial on that. This is removing noise with dust and scratches, or adding noise like HLS Auto. I've got tutorials on that. And then there's a whole obsolete category in here. It's best not to use those because eventually Adobe stops shipping those obsolete effects. It makes them obsolete for several versions for you to finish up your work, and then eventually you'll install a new version and they'll be gone. There's others for basic 3D. So here's one that's fun to play with, where you can swivel a clip around either horizontally or vertically, and you can tilt this. It's got some uses, definitely. Bunch of stylized effects in here, glows, embosses, time effects, echo effects. I've got a great tutorial on using this in a very stylized way to give you jumpy, crazy kind of video. Transform effects. Crop is a good one to use. Crop does exactly what it says. So if I turn the crop up, it starts chopping that out. So you could easily crop this video up into multiple pieces. You could crop videos, put them side by side. I've got a whole tutorial on creating split screens using crop and transform. And then there's some effects that are transitions that you could apply, and others that really aren't that important, like these utility ones or time code and stuff. So let's just create a blur effect on this video, and I want to show you how we can animate it over time. Animation happens when you have keyframes, which I'll show you in a second, that change over time. So we'll go to the beginning of this clip, and instead of hunting through, if we just click in here and type blur, there's Gaussian blur. Because the clip is selected, I'll double click and apply it. And Gaussian blur is pretty simple. It just has an amount. And if you turn that up, you'll see it start to blur. You can get rid of the dark edge by turning on repeat pixels. What I'm trying to do is recreate an effect of a camera being out of blur and then going into focus, called rack focus. So we'll start by blurring this. Let's blur it quite a bit at the beginning. Right now, there are no keyframes. If I click on the stopwatch, I've added a keyframe. So at the beginning, the clip is set to be blurry by 90. I'll move forward, and I can type in a number. I can drag left and right, and you can see it creates a keyframe. If I click this reset button, it resets it back to 0. So now when I go back to the beginning and hit play, that's what it looks like. It's a very useful effect, very interesting idea where you start blurry, because it's always interesting to tease people. You tease them with a little blur and then you focus in. If you want this to be slower, you just drag the keyframe slower, and now it's going to be slower. You can select both of these and move them around. So you can change it so that it's blurry until here and then it starts to unblur. But let's keep that at the beginning. Next up is saving this and reapplying it. And what I want you to understand is the duration between the clip and the effects control panel. This duration here, left and right, and the duration of this clip are directly tied together. When you move this playhead to the beginning, you're at the beginning of the clip. When you move it beyond the clip, now you're beyond the keyframes for that. So I want to apply this same effect to this next clip here. And this clip, you can see, is much longer. But I want the blur to be the same between the two. Now you can just do this by selecting this copying and pasting. So this clip, the Gaussian blur, I could copy, select this and paste it, and it's going to be the same blur. And there's nothing wrong with that. That works. But you can also select the clip instead of having to select the Gaussian blur. Just select the clip with the effects, copy that, go to the next clip, and you can use the edit paste attributes, or you can use the keyboard shortcut, or you can right click and choose paste attributes. And here you can see a list of everything that's applied to the clip I copied, and Gaussian blur is one of those. So when I click OK, I've now done the equivalent of that. This is also really useful if you need to paste attributes to a whole bunch of clips too, which could also be size information too, not just effects. Now I want to show you one other way to save this, and that's to right click on the effect or effects. You can hold the Command key on Mac, Control key on Windows, and click on as many effects. So you could create a whole stack of effects and save it as a preset. And I'll call this Rack Focus. And you have three options: scale, anchor to the in, anchor to out. So remember I showed you the second clip was longer. If I choose scale, the second clip is longer, so it will paste in the blur, but it will move the keyframe and scale it based on the clip. I'm going to choose to anchor it because I want it to be the exact same. Anchoring will keep it exactly the same and start it at the beginning. Anchor out is if I had a different effect going out. I could also write a description. Click OK, and now if we look at our effects and twirl down presets, and there it is. So that was the clip that I copied and pasted it on. I can now drag that over, and it's the same thing. I've applied that. So very useful. One thing I will tell you you should do is right-click on the presets and export your presets and find a place. If you've gone to a lot of trouble to tweak a bunch of things, occasionally Premiere Pro, if you have to reset Premiere Pro, which we'll talk about at the end, you could lose those presets. So it makes sense, maybe once a month, right click on that and just export your presets and just keep a whole bunch of them in there in case you have to import them later. All right, let's talk about masking now and isolating an effect on this guy. So let's add the blur on his face. So same thing as before, we'll grab the blur, apply it, I'll turn that up, and you'll notice three choices here. This is an elliptical mask, a polygon, or a pen. If I click on the ellipse, it's going to keep the effect just in that area. And we can resize this mask so that it's around his face. If you move to the middle, you can change where this is on his face. And you can do things like feather the mask. You could expand the mask so it's larger or smaller. And now when I deselect, you see the blur is just on his face. If he moves too far, then you're going to have to add keyframes for the mask path. There are controls here to track forward, track one frame, or track backwards, forwards, or one frame forwards. If you click on the little wrench, you can tell it whether you're tracking position, rotation, or position, scale, and rotation, and turn on or off preview. If you preview is off by default, it's much faster to calculate. I want to set your expectations. This tracker is not very accurate. Many, many times it will actually lose what it's tracking. So if you're trying to track his face and you don't have preview on and it takes 5, 10, 20 minutes, you might be sitting there waiting, thinking that Gaussian blur is tracking perfectly, only to find out when Premiere Pro is finished, the Gaussian blur is like way back over on the other side. And that's just the state of the tracker. It's just not that good. Let me just show you quickly how you can manually track. It's a pain, but at least you could do it. If you click on the mask path, and by the way, the mask is constantly becoming deselected. I hear this all the time. My mask, I lost my mask. You didn't lose it, it just became deselected. So click on the mask path, there's a keyframe there. We'll move ahead. He's not moving that much, but I just want to show you, you can move this and it adds another keyframe and it adds another keyframe. So you can manually track it. What you'll notice is that if something is moving quite a bit, the tracking is going to not be as accurate. We're way too used to Hollywood style. It's called rotoscoping. When you cut someone out of a background, that is really freaking hard, really hard. I'm not talking a little tricky, I'm talking unbelievably hard. I've got a tutorial about working with masks in something like After Effects. If you really want to pursue that, then use Mocha in After Effects, or even better, Mocha Pro, which is a separate program you have to buy, and it does amazing rotoscoping. It's still really hard. I just want to set your expectations. You're not about to import any video, push a button and remove the background and rotoscope. It ain't gonna happen. But let's get fun. Let's add something to this guy here. I want to track this guy. And I'm going to add mosaic effect to this. And we'll make this a little bit bigger. And the effect I want, I'm going to grab this shape. And what I'll do is I'll follow him all the way to the end as if the mosaic is trailing behind him. Now there isn't a nice little handle here, so you have to click and drag and then drag and hold the shift key. I wish there was a handle. There's not. So let's add a mask path to this. And you see how the mask became deselected as soon as I added a keyframe? This is just one of the peculiarities that will frustrate you. You add a keyframe, it deselects the mask. Yikes. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the scroll wheel, or you could use your trackpad, and I'll move backwards, and then I'll hold the shift key, because that means I'm moving in one direction. And you can see how it's adding keyframes. If you tap the tilde key to make this bigger or maximize this frame, then you can see it a little clearer. Now, I'm not following him, you know, the perfect shape that you would expect. And again, that would take rotoscoping. You know, if I really wanted to be accurate, I would have followed his body, but he's pretty small. I just want to give you an idea of what this kind of thing looks like when an effect changes based on an isolated area. All right, so now you can see the mosaic follows along as he comes in. And that could have been any effect. That could have been a blur or a color change. It could have revealed something else. So have fun with effects. Let's talk about a very useful effect, and that's warp stabilizer. Warp stabilizer will stabilize your footage, and it will also scale the footage because well, I'll show you. I'll turn scale off and show you why that works. So you can see this camera is moving a little bit. And I want it more stable. So I'll select the clip, and in my effects, I'll type warp ST. There's warp stabilizer. Double click, and it's going to start analyzing this in the background. You can continue working while this is going on. And it finished that quick. This is dependent on the power of your computer. A really slow computer, it's going to take longer. A very long clip, it's going to take even longer. Okay, so now if we look at this, we can see it's much more smooth. And I'll turn this off so you can see it as an example. And that's back on. If you look at the warp stabilizer settings, you can see you have smooth motion or no motion. This is smooth motion. I'll show you no motion in a second. You can also look at the framing. So there are several choices: stabilize, stabilize and crop, stabilize, crop, and automatically scale. So let's just stabilize and crop. And now I'll play this back. Actually, let me just stabilize. And this gives you a better idea of what's going on. So the black edges are because to stabilize this, it's scaled it down and it's moving it around. So when the original camera operator jerked the camera to the left, warp stabilizer converts it to the right. And it's not just changing XY position, it's doing incredibly calculations, because no one moves a camera, a lens perfectly on a subject at 90 degrees. You've got some yaw and move like this, and rotation, and it's removing that. So now when I put scale on, you don't see the black bars, but the video is scaled up. So if you want to do what the professionals do, if they know they're going to stabilize something, they actually shoot a little further away. That way when it crops and zooms, it's going to look good. Now let me show you no motion. So in this clip, there's very little motion, but what I want to do is emulate as if this was shot on a tripod. So let me turn off warp stabilizer and show you. Lots of movement there. So warp stabilize smooth looks like this. If I change the motion to no motion, you can see it's restabilizing it. Now look at this. I'm just going to make this larger. Look at that. Now that looks like it was shot on a tripod. That's really useful if you can't carry a big tripod with you, yet you want these shots. Maybe this is a travel log and you want nice, solid shots. You don't want them moving around. So stick your elbows into your sides if you're shooting with a DSLR or anything you're bringing to your face. But if you stabilize that by sticking your elbows in, holding that tight, you'll still move around. Warp stabilizer, no motion. Now it looks like you carted a big old tripod all day. The last thing I want to show you